Ukraine. I've been covering the conflict daily for a month at the time of recording, and it's been a curious experience. We'll get into how we were wrong in a minute, but first let's recap what we've actually done and said on the subject. So how have the Lotus Eaters covered Ukraine so far? Let's quickly review all the content we've published about the conflict, because if you've just been following on the YouTube main channel, you will have missed quite a lot of our analysis and coverage published on lotuseaters.com, both our second channel and the website. So we've been producing these daily updates of the conflict, as you can see here on the front page of the site. We've also done, well, this has been every day, about 10:30 each morning, about 25,000 words now in this 1 month.
That's quite a lot, isn't it?
Yes, there is. So if you think we're not covering it enough, go and check that out to see if that can keep you up to date. I've also done podcast segments on it. I'm going to read through some of the ones we've done. We've done over 16 of 76 segments on Ukraine, which averages almost an update every other day on the podcast. We covered the Russian invasion when it first started. We talked about Fallout Ukraine, the Wild Wild East, the George Floyd effect in Ukraine, I think from Callum. We've talked about Russian military corruption and potential tyre problems. We've explained thermobaric weapons. We've questioned the long term in Ukraine. We've talked about neo-Nazis in Ukraine. We've talked about neo-Nazis in Russia and Russian propaganda. We've talked about Vlad the Impaler and his attempts to get Western allies and NATO more involved in the conflict. We've talked about weapons of mass destruction, placing Ukraine in a broader geopolitical context. We looked at the biolab story of Ukraine as well, something which not many outlets have actually covered in detail. We've talked about the Russian mafia extorting the Russian army. We've looked at abusive mob justice in Ukraine. We've questioned the impact of this conflict on the global food supply as well. And there were some segments that Leah did which I haven't included in that list. Then we've also done direct videos on Ukraine. If you look at our analysis tab, we did a country focus on Ukraine in Contemplations pre-invasion, just to set some of the groundwork. Carl did a video on propaganda covering the media's reporting, particularly on this issue. I've done 3 videos on Ukraine at the time of publishing: the US destabilization of Ukraine, a video on Russia's active measures in Ukraine, and a summary of Putin's war demands with Thomas. And then we also have 5 articles about the subject. So the first one being from you, Josh, which is why Russia invaded.
Yes, so what I was trying to do really was explain why Putin might want to do this in the first place. And I think some people assumed that I was making excuses for him, but no, I was just trying to say, okay, well, this is his reasoning for it. And I didn't include the things like the denazification of Ukraine, because I think that that's a bit of a smokescreen. I don't think that's actually why he wanted to invade.
No, not at all. And then we've published Putin's War of Lost Glory by Hugo, our guest writer, which gives us more of a sort of Central European impression and perspective on Russia and the Soviet Union and so on. We've looked at the NATO question with, again, Thomas's article, and we've had external writers, John Tangley and Simon Webb, writing about how sanctions on Russia will create a monster, looking at the Russian domestic situation and the hypocrisy of the British regarding Ukraine. So I think it's reasonable to say that we've been fairly intensively covering this issue. That's quite a lot of content, I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah, I imagine there are some people out there that are probably sick of hearing about it, to be honest.
Yeah, no, and I fully sympathise if you're one of them. It's not been the only thing we've been covering. I think we've been keeping up to date with everything else as well. But because it's been a significant part of our coverage, and a lot of people have strong opinions about it, I thought it was worth doing this segment to just sort of explain our position a bit more to those people, because there's been some interesting conversation surrounding our coverage. And before I get into that, there's an analogy that I like to use, which I've come up with about this conflict, about stepping stones. So it seems to me that when you get a hot button issue, something with a lot of details where people have strong opinions, they've built a narrative in their head of what is real. And that narrative rests on various really important points. So to the person. So the Russian analogy, for example, the pro-Russian analogy might be, for example, that Ukraine is a Nazi state, or that the 2014 Euromaidan was a coup by the pro-Western powers, or that Ukraine is a puppet of NATO, things like this. These are very important stepping stones. So when you talk about Ukraine, you have to land on every single one of those stepping stones, or they will feel dissatisfied, because they will feel you're deliberately excluding things which to them are a vital part of the narrative on the issue. What do you think about that?
That seems perfectly reasonable to me. I don't think it's necessarily exclusive to Ukraine. It's
No.
just something that tends to be the case in general. And I mean, I find myself doing this as well when I look at other people covering the same news that I've been covering.
You didn't mention this, you didn't mention that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I kind of feel like, this would be a really interesting angle. And it's almost like it's like you have this expectation, and when you don't get the payoff of them hitting all the right notes, then you kind of feel a bit disappointed in a way.
No, I agree. But then conversely, it's not just stepping stones, because when something is as emotive as Ukraine, there are also what I call crocodiles. So there are things which, if you land on, someone will immediately start snapping and saying, for example, you're just a pro this or pro that, or this is propaganda, this is a false narrative, this is blah, 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 blah. And as soon as you land on any one of those, that's it, you're wrong. Like, this is the end of listening, basically. And so I feel like whenever I cover this subject, which is quite a lot, it feels like you're having to cross a river on these very particular stepping stones with all of these crocodiles in the water. And you just know that because the setup of stepping stones and crocodiles is different for every person who's watching, that you are absolutely going to be wrong. I think, in fact, there is no way to be right when covering this issue because of the framing I've just discussed. And to illustrate this point, let's take a look at some of the comments that we've received. So this was a post on our community page, Lotus Eaters. So we have my video on Russia's active measures, and the one of the top comments there is, and crickets about the CIA involvement and the coup prompting Russian intervention. And then if we go to the next page of comments, we have, never mind the astroturfed colour revolution and the WEF puppet Zelensky, World Economic Forum. Then we have, history and context is irrelevant now for some reason. These guys have clearly picked a side. Then the next one, thank you for the one-sided reporting. You can tell that there have been some stepping stones missed here, and perhaps even some crocodiles trodden on. But if we go to the next one, I did a whole video about the exact things that they are complaining about before even watching the video. So it's just wrong. But the problem is, of course, that because the issue is so large and we cover it in lots of different pieces, people tend to see one thing and just assume that that's our side, right? They know where we are. They've got a simple narrative. We've trodden on their crocodiles.
There's a few things here that I think are worth mentioning. That on the one hand, of course, we don't have like a community narrative here. We all kind of make up our own minds, have our own arguments and cases, and we fall in various areas, I suppose. We broadly agree just by merit of the fact that we agree in lots of other areas as well. I mean, there is that, of course. But I can certainly excuse people for not keeping up with all of our content, because there has been a lot, as you listed off that massive list. If someone's managed to watch all of that, they've been doing a pretty good job.
No, I agree.
So I can understand why they would perhaps miss that, but I also understand where you're coming from in that
it's the fact that they immediately jump to, you've obviously never mentioned this ever in your entire coverage or career. It's like literally the video I did right before that should be easily accessible to you if you're seeing that video, covered the exact things they're talking about. So but you're right, of course. But it's not just been people on the more pro-Russian side. There's also been people on the pro-Ukrainian side. We've had people commenting or writing in, accusing us of being Putin apologists. That's one I've seen quite a lot now, including an impressive 1,000-word rant in Cyrillic left on one of my social media posts. It's a unique way to make first contact with a foreign language, to have people writing these screeds and things. So I do welcome audience engagement. That's probably not the best way. If you have to get something off your chest, then go for it. But otherwise, the 1,000 words is a bit much to read. And so just thinking back to the stepping stones and crocodiles, I think it is impossible not to be wrong on this subject, because it's so emotive. If you have the right opinion to one viewer, you have the wrong opinion to almost all the others. It's kind of you can only please some of the people sort of thing.
I think that's the case with a lot of coverage. It's only on really uncontroversial topics, just like, we're against people
murder.
We're against murder, we're against noncery. Right. Who's going to defend that in our audience? I hope no one, to be honest. But.
Yeah, absolutely. So in this way, I fully accept that we were wrong on Ukraine, and we will continue to be wrong. But this doesn't make our coverage or analysis a futile endeavour. It's par for the course when reporting on something like this. I think even if you disagree with some of the commentators and perspectives we've presented, there is still a wealth of information and analysis in our coverage that readers can learn from if they are interested in following Ukraine closely. We haven't tried to push any particular angle or to propagandize viewers into supporting one side or the other in the conflict. And many people, even from the so-called alternative sphere of media, they've chosen a side and gone with it. But what we have done, I think, is made you aware of the important events in this long and convoluted story of Ukraine and its invasion, whether those events agree with your stance or not. So there we go. And of course, this hasn't always been well received, and a lot of that is quite predictable. But I'll end this segment with a couple of questions. First of all, is it Putin apologia to point out that Putin is not literally Hitler? And the second question, is someone a Western stooge or a BBC shill if they diverge from the line that absolutely everything in Ukraine is going according to Putin's brilliant 5D chess strategy? If your answer to either of these questions is yes, then I think you're more likely to be disappointed by our coverage than most people. But otherwise, thank you ever so much for watching, and we hope to carry on covering this conflict for as long as it lasts.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as this article from John Wheatley on Media Lies Explained. There is, of course, an audio track for Silver and Gold tier members if you like to listen instead of read. But if you'd like to find out what else John has put out, you can follow him on Getter at John Wheatley on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.